Ladies and gentlemen, wow, this is a real pleasure. I'm very excited about this course. It's every single one of these courses, and this is the third of the 3 courses that we had, third semester, if you will. Davi, my son, gave the last one virtually. Some of you participated. So I have big shoes to fill. He's a size 12, I'm a size 11. And, but you know what? There's nothing like being together in person. And when I say it's a real pleasure, I mean it, to study Torah together. And this is a particularly important course because, you know, we live in a country with laws, our beloved country. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. But we're going to introduce something that's on a completely different level because it's godly. It's uniquely Jewish. And we're going to explore in this series how it differs from the law of the land. Which land? All lands. And I begin with a little tale that I've definitely shared here before. The one thing that I did not provide was earplugs in case you heard my jokes and stories. But now would be the time to plug your ear. It fits.
They're fine, you know.
It fits so well with this series that I have to say it, even if I shared it before. Yankel, the miser. He's a wealthy man, but he is cheap. He doesn't engage in charity, which is, of course, something that Jews are supposed to be involved in. He's known as a miser, but he's a very pious Jew, you see. He keeps the law. In fact, the letter of the law, I mean strict halacha is halacha. So, one day there's a knock on the door. There's a poor beggar, very, very thin, skeleton, hadn't eaten for days. He barely has the energy to ask for bread. He says, Yankel, please, I beg you, some food. I haven't eaten in days. He says, you're coming to me? You know I don't share. You know I don't give of my possession, of my wealth. He says, but I'm going to die if you don't give me anything. I beg you something just to get to the next home to schnorr there. So he says, you know what? Hold on a second. He runs down to the basement. There's a little fridge, and he remembers that he had fish that was a month and a half old, that really belonged in the garbage. He says, I'll do a mitzvah, and I'll give the guy fish, and I'll save his life. He's feeling good about himself, because he is a religious Jew, you see. And he runs, and he gives him the fish, and the guy quickly gobbles it up, but it was verstunkener fish. It smelled. This guy hadn't eaten for a long time. And you know, when you're on an empty stomach, and you know what happened after World War II, I mean, you gotta pace yourself. Here, he's eating verstunkener, spoiled, rotten fish on an empty stomach yet. And he gets terribly ill. The next day, Yankel comes home from shul, very happy. His wife says, you're such a good mood. He says, what? He says, today I'm going to have the honor of fulfilling a very important mitzvah in the Torah. Visiting the sick. He goes, who's sick? He says, you remember the guy that I did a mitzvah for yesterday by saving his life, by giving him a verstunkener shtickel fish? Today I'm going to visit him. Mitzvah number 2. He's so happy. Well, he finishes his visit, and the next day he comes home from the synagogue after morning prayers, and now he's on a different level of excitement. His wife says, "Was is?" He says, you remember Yankel I did the favor for? Yeah. You remember I visited him yesterday? Yeah. He passed away. And there's a great mitzvah to escort the dead. I'm going to perform that mitzvah today. 3 mitzvahs. He's so happy. He's grinning. Anyway, the next day he comes home. Of course, he's happy again. Was is heint? What's today? Today I'm going to pay a shiva call to his family. 4 mitzvahs. And he says to his wife, look at this beautiful religion of ours. I'm going to say it in Yiddish, my friends, and I'm going to translate. Guck, wie viel Mitzvahs kann man kriegen von ein verstunkener Stickelfisch. Look how many mitzvahs one could acquire from one rotten, smelly piece of fish. Now here's David. What's the problem with this guy? The problem with this guy is he doesn't get it. He's so busy being religious, frum, that he forgets to do what God needs him to do. You see, before being frum, you got to be a mensch.
Right.
You got to use your seichel, and you got to be a decent human being. And this is really what this course is all about. You see why I have to tell the story again? It's just, well, you're going to see soon. You don't know what the class, with the details. We're going to explore what civil law is about, what Jewish law is about, and how they differ. Our laws are put into place for what reason? To regulate, to make sure that your rights are not infringed upon, to make sure my conduct doesn't hurt anybody. That's what the laws are for. Jewish law is here for a much broader and deeper reason, and that is to shape society. It's a completely different thing. There's shaping the person, there's shaping a society, or there's making sure that a society is able to live side by side in a civil manner. It's interesting to note, and I'm not going to get too deeply into this, that the laws of the land really reflect the values of those that shape the laws. They also reflect on an historical notion. If you look at any particular country or society, you could trace where the laws came from and why those laws were put into place. And I'm going to give you one or two very brief examples. For instance, Western civilizations consider freedom of the individual, equality, very basic rights. But if you look at our country, when it comes to our freedoms, when it comes to freedom of speech, I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's the way it should be. How it is today, we're not going to discuss, but freedom of speech, freedom of religion, property rights, this is chayk v'lo. There's no compromising on these values in this country. Not so much in European countries. Now, can anybody share with me why they think that is from an historical point of view? From an historical point of view?
It's different in Europe.
David? Yeah. Or why over here? Let's discuss America.
When the founding fathers were putting together the Constitution ultimately,
Yeah.
they were coming out of a period where the Protestants and the Catholics were killing each other in Europe. And they didn't want to replicate that. So he said, no officials wishes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's about the religion. And also,
And
many...
royalty was, we had these different fiefdoms in Europe, and it was control.
Control,
the masses.
exactly.
And that was the founding of this country, is
Right.
like the Pilgrims and the first people who came, Roanoke and those different colonies, Plymouth, they wanted to get away from oppression and start new lives.
Exactly. So basically, the rights of the citizens were being infringed upon.
Correct, yeah.
That's how our society was born out of this wrong. Now you could see why in America, freedom of speech is protected under the law. There's a reason for that. It's because of the historical backdrop, and while we broke off from Great Britain and developed, you could say the greatest experiment, whatever you want to call it, but developed a pretty fine society, that freedom of religion, property rights, and so forth are very central to the value system of America. Okay. I'm not going to get into other countries, but I just wanted to give that example. Now, what's today's lesson going to focus on? Today's lesson is the question of the purpose of law. What is the purpose of law? So please join me in your student book. And by the way, feel free to, if you need something to write, feel free to scribble all over and put your name on it so you can take it home with you. And if anybody needs, I have pens in my office, if anybody would like. This is yours to take home, to study. Look at page 2 of your student book, exercise 1.1. And I don't know if we're gonna go through this full exercise, but let us begin. If you were a referee given a few minutes to address the players before a game of football, what were the top 3 things you would say? What would it be if you were a referee? Now, I particularly love this contrast. How about if you were a coach? What would you say if you were a coach? Would the top 3 things be the same for a referee as it would be for a coach? You're shaking your head. The answer is of course not. Of course not. It's very different because the role of a referee is very different than the role of a coach. I don't want to get ahead of myself because this is really the gist of the whole class, but it's a great example. And I was reading it, I said, boy, they hit the nail on the head. Because to really understand this, you have to get into these analogies. You okay? Okay?
I did.
All right.
Sorry. And accidentally got turned on.
So at the bottom it says, divide the words on the following list into 2 categories and give each category a descriptive title. If you wish, you can then add further examples for each category. If you wish. Not necessary, but so the referee's role is to make sure that the rights, so to speak, of the other players are not being infringed upon, to make sure that every one of the players are following the same rules. Nobody's cheating. You got to play by the rules, as the saying goes. The job of a coach, first of all, the coach, it's my team. The other team is the opposing team. The job of a coach is to make sure to bring out the best in the players, to make sure the tactics, the strategy is one that will hopefully win at the end. In fact, if the coach is a really good coach, how the players conduct themselves on and off the court is very, very important. In other words, a coach could decide to bench one of his players because he went out drinking last night before the playoffs. What's wrong with that? Let me play. No, the coach wants to shape how the player behaves, his overall conduct. It's not, of course, he has to play by the rules. But he's a referee, but much, much more than a referee. And we're going to make the case, my friends, that the law of the land, civil law, protecting the rights of the citizens of any respective country, is like what a referee would do. The law is governing the Jew, our Constitution, the Torah, given to us by God, is that of a coach. It's here to shape us. It's here to give us a world view, not just not to infringe on somebody else's rights, but to do the right thing. It's not only about personal rights, but it's about doing the right thing. It's a completely different set of laws. Now, to be sure, a Jew living in America, a Jew living in Israel, in the UK, in Australia, in South Africa, you got to follow the law of the land. Now, the Torah says you got to do that. You cannot conduct yourself according to the Torah's law and then get in trouble with the state and say, I was just being a good Jew. We understand that. But nevertheless, it has some serious ramifications because, as we will see, Torah law mandates much more than the law of our great country, our land. Let's see, before we do this, let's examine how modern secular law perceives its purpose. The Declaration of Rights of Man was approved by the National Assembly of France in the year 1789. The Declaration of Rights describes the function of law in the following sentence. Helen, can I ask you, I know that for those that are going to read, we're going to pause for 1 second until our dear friend Mike, who's taping this class, comes so that you can hear it. We are on your page number 4, text 1.
Liberty consists in the freedom to do everything which injures no one else. Hence, the exercise of natural rights of each man has no limits, except those which assure to the other members of the society the enjoyment of the same rights. These limits can only be determined by law. Law can only prohibit such actions as are hurtful to society. Nothing may be prevented which is not forbidden by law, and no one may be forced to do anything not provided for by law.
So the role of the Declaration, as you just read, determining the necessity to limit each individual's personal rights so as to preserve and protect the rights of the society as a whole. This is the role of limiting the rights of others as to make sure that everybody in society is living equally under the law and their rights are not infringed upon. Now let us examine, we're going to have other examples. Let's go straight now to the Torah law and how it's perceived and what is the role that the Torah's laws try to accomplish. For the purpose of this discussion, I think this is obvious what I'm about to say. We're not going to discuss mitzvot that have to do between man and God. You know, prayer and loving Hashem, you know, religiously oriented laws. For the purpose of this discussion, it's all going to be laws relating to interpersonal conduct. Let's call it civil and criminal law. Okay? You understand why. It says in the Torah, Hashem says, these are the laws that you shall place before them. It's very interesting to note, because everything is by divine providence. What is the parsha in this Shabbat? Bichu Kosai. How do you like that? Can't get a better, more appropriate parsha for this course. Bichu Kosai means the statutes. If in my statutes you will walk. This is what the first words of this week's parsha begin with. It says, these are the laws statutes or the laws that I've placed before them. Who's them? The Jewish people, which means the laws of the Torah, my friends, are uniquely Jewish. They pertain to Jews, and that's why they were given to the Jewish people. Non-Jews have the 7 universal laws, referred to as the 7 Noahide laws. The Jewish people have 613 of them, plus 7 rabbinic laws, but for the purpose of this discussion, many, many do's, many, many don'ts, constantly. We're stepping out of line here, we're stepping out of line there. It's important to note these are uniquely Jewish laws for the Jewish people. And some of them, they're going to make shock you, are obligatory for the Jew to do. If you look at secular law, you would shake your head and say, hold on a second, I'm obligated to do this? I'm obligated to refrain from how I conduct myself in my own property? It's ridiculous. Because the objective of the Torah law is very, very different, as we said before, and we're going to get into it a little bit more. Now the question is, why, oh why do we need Hashem to shape our law, the law of the land, civil rights? Why can't we have men of each society, maybe great men, like the founding fathers, maybe great rabbis, to determine how the law of the land should be according to Jewish law? So I'm going to turn now, I guess I'll go in order, and if you don't want to read, we'll just go to the next person. Bruce, do you have glasses?
I can borrow Helen's.
Okay, there we go. So we're going to go now to page 5, text 2. Why, the why of Jewish law.
Every human society requires laws. What is the advantage of God's Torah laws over the legal systems set up by other nations? Why does the verse state that these are the laws you shall set before them, thereby telling us that these laws are a unique divine system exclusively given to us by God? The reason for this is that the divine laws contain elements absent from other legal systems. God's laws are based on the principles of compassion and goodness.
That's it. Need we say more?
Basic human.
So in this text, Abarbanel, that Bruce just read from, maintains that the Jewish legal system differs from the secular legal systems because it is premised on what? On compassion and goodness. Not only not infringing on somebody else's rights, but to do what is right. And this underlying principle of Jewish law is expressed in the following passage. It's short, so I'll read it. It says over here, Shamor tishmuna es mitzvot Hashem Elokechem, taken from Deuteronomy. Diligently observe God's commandments that He has commanded you. Do what is right and good in God's eyes. These are very different things, right? You have to observe the commandments, I would think. All right, I have to make sure that I live in peace and harmony side by side with my neighbor. But then he adds something. Do what is right and good in God's eyes, which would require the Jew, as we're going to see soon, to do much more than the letter of the law. Much more than our great society would require under the law in terms of my behavior towards others. You know what, I'll jump the gun just to give you one example so we know what we're talking about. In American law, if I'm walking on the street and I see a wallet on the floor, on the ground, you find people things all the time. Am I obligated to pick it up and look for the owner? Will I be arrested? Will I be given a summons? If somebody sees me do that or just pocket it and walk away, and today there's cameras all over the place, you don't get away with anything today. I don't think that's a bad thing, actually. I think it's a very good thing. Many people who shouldn't be doing many things are held to account. You may have a very poor reputation, right? But are you going to be arrested? No. Summons? No. Jewish law mandates that if you see a lost object, you have to pick it up and you have to look for the owner. This falls under the category, do what is right in the eyes of Hashem. Again, why? Because it's not only making sure to protect the rights of others, but doing what is right. You're going to hear me repeat this over and over. That's like the chorus, because this is really the essence of what we're trying to say here. So Torah law is not just about protecting rights, but doing what is right. Secular law sees its purpose very different. And I gave the example like a referee, right? A referee has to make sure the players play by the rules. And if you don't, you'll be flagged, you'll be benched, or maybe ejected from the game. In fact, the coach could be ejected from the game. I remember growing up a Yankee fan, we had a coach who coached the New York Yankees for many years. Billy Martin. Oy vey. Oliver Shalom. Gosh, God's dealing with Billy Martin now. He was the character, quite the character. He would get in the face. I think he was ejected more than any coach in any team in any sport ever. He himself. He would get, and as a kid growing up in New York, we loved him. He was just a character. He was entertaining, and he would fight. The problem is he fought with Steinbrenner too, with the owner too. Anyway, I digress.
It's a...
But Torah law, Torah is not Hashem's rule book. It's Hashem's fill in the blank playbook. You see how He needs us to conduct ourselves to shape a society. People should treat each other like family. The world should be viewed as a community. Now you know why in this Chabad we say you entered into a family, right? And that's how it is. As we said before, Torah law's aim is to shape the human being, to become a mensch, You could have somebody, a citizen of this country, who never violated a law in his life or her life, pays taxes on time, and you would look at this person and say, this person's not a mensch. Why? Because they only do what is within the law of the land. What about sharing a little bit of what your possessions with somebody less fortunate? Am I obligated? No, there you go. That's why I told the silly story earlier about the Vashtuk and the fish. He was a perfect Jew, and that was his perfect problem. You know? Maybe one day, not today, but I'll tell you, maybe I'll leave it for next class, an incredible story with the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, where he really describes what a religious Jew is. And it's not what religious Jew think it is, right? It's not about following the law. So Torah never asks the question, are any rights of our citizens being violated by this action? That's a question that you will never see in the Torah. It's not about rights. And I understand why our laws are set up to make sure that people's rights are not infringed upon. We understand that. And we can't expect people to go beyond that. But you'll never see in the Torah where the question of whether people's rights are being violated. Why? Because that's not where the Torah is coming from. That's not where God is coming from. As we said in the verse before, the Torah is interested in creating a passionate society. So it's much more than rights. It's not less, it's much more. As that we will see in text 4 on page 7. David, would you like to read for us? And this is taken from the previous Rebbe.
Sure. Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, there are two types of laws. A, laws that create life. B, laws created by life. Human laws are created by life. God's Torah is divine law that creates life.
Wonderful. A perfect example for this, and we have a few lawyers in the house. Who in our society, rhetorical question, studies law? Lawyers and judges. Why doesn't everybody study the law? First of all, because they're busy doing whatever they're doing, and for the lawyers amongst us, it's a full-time job. Full-time job. You gotta really apply yourself. You can't specialize in too many things, right? Maybe an accountant knows accounting laws, but an attorney has to know his laws. What do you think I studied in yeshiva? I'm not a lawyer, I'm a rabbi. But it's not why I studied certain laws in yeshiva. A traditional Jewish education, by contrast, includes intensive study of halacha, which is Jewish law, and this is for everybody, not just for somebody who wants to become a rabbi or a legal scholar. And traditionally, I went to yeshiva. The tractates of Talmud, the sections of the Talmud that I studied, which is part of the yeshiva curriculum system, had to do with what? Civil and criminal law. Why? The answer is because it's there to shape us as human beings. It's here to teach us how to be a mensch, so that eventually when I marry, I'm a husband, wie zu darf zu sein, the way a husband should behave himself. I don't tell my wife, I don't think I'm obligated to take out the trash tonight because I already took one out, and this is the second bag that you've filled. So I think I'm within my rights, Mr. Meshuggah Cup. See, my wife would not stand for that for a second. Yeah. That's why I married a Texan. You know, she lived in Texas for a while. Mike, we're going to have to take this off this tape over here.
Edit that, please.
It's a little dangerous when a New Yorker meets a Texan. By the way, I want to take a moment, and I should have started this way.
Yes.
We should take a moment of silence for what happened in Texas. Yesterday was a very busy day, and when I read this, it breaks your heart. These are, you know, the innocents amongst us that went through such a time, and their parents are grieving beyond belief. That should be the last that we hear of it. Take just a moment. May Hashem protect us all, and may this be the last of this craziness. We need Mashiach. That's the bottom line. Jewish law needs to be studied in depth, and its approach and values need to be internalized and made part of our lives. I don't think any lawyer would say, I'm studying the law because I want it to be part of my life and I want to internalize it. I'm sure when they leave the office, they want to, put their brain on pause and rest up and think about anything but law. Am I right?
Absolutely.
I just took a wild guess. Am I right, Sandy? There you go. Okay. Now, when is doing the right thing an obligation? This is a whole nother thing. Fine, we got the premise. We got the distinction between Torah law and the law of the land. But when is doing the right thing an obligation? Could you obligate everybody to behave in a superhuman way or in a pious way? So we've established that Torah law seeks to shape society rather than just regulate. Verstehe, I understand. By the way, by the end of today's class, you'll all speak perfect Yiddish, right? We're going to give 4 case studies, and I love these examples. That's going to give us an idea, a very clear idea. So, Mike, whenever you're ready, you're giving you a good exercise. We're going to turn to page 8, case study A. Now listen to this incredible story. Whenever you're ready.
Nicholas Jung considered himself a lucky man. A German who immigrated to the United States in 1848, Jung had worked hard to carve out a living for himself and eventually prosper as the owner of a mortuary in San Francisco. The business allowed him and wife Rosina to purchase a modest lot on the top of California Street Hill, where they built a quaint cottage-style home and planted a beautiful garden. Every day, California's sunlight and fresh air would stream in through their windows. Jung had no reason to believe that anything could interrupt his idyllic life, or that any one person could somehow deprive him of the beautiful days he had worked so hard to enjoy. But Jung also hadn't accounted for Charles Crocker, a very rich and very petty man who would eventually become both his neighbor and the bane of his existence. At 6 feet tall and 300 pounds, Charles Crocker cut an imposing figure. He had filled his bank account by being one of the Big Four barons behind the building of the Central Pacific Railroad. By the 1870s, he could afford whatever he desired. What he wanted was to loom over San Francisco like a gargoyle. Crocker and his wealthy partners began scouting California Street Hill for its scenic views and proximity to the city's financial district. Soon a group of wealthy men, including Crocker, were buying up all the homes on their chosen blocks. By the time Crocker was finished, he had erected a 12,000 square foot mansion. With its new wealthy inhabitants, California Street Hill was renamed Nob Hill. As the project neared completion in 1876, there was one nagging detail. On the northeast corner of the block, Nicholas Jung was reluctant to sell. His cottage was dwarfed by the mansions going up, but he had come to enjoy the neighborhood. With one or both men causing acrimony, the end result was that Jung was not moving. At a reported cost of $3,000, Crocker had his workers construct a wooden fence on his land that towered over 3 sides of Jung's home. With its 40-foot tall panels, the enclosure acted like a window shade, blotting out the sun and cool air and immersing Jung in darkness.
Nice guy, huh?
Oh, he wasn't wonderful.
You have a picture of this in your book?
Yeah.
You do? Okay, there you go. So the question is, should Charles Crocker's fence be legally allowed to stand? What say you? So at that time,
He was putting this up on his own property.
his own property, this is the point, atazeh. So should he be allowed to do this? It's his own property.
At this point in time, no.
Legally, yes, morally, no.
Well, it does a legally yes, morally no. So it's legally yes, but everybody has a bad taste in their mouth now
Oh, yes.
because it doesn't feel right, because we're sitting in a room with members of the tribe or people who are sympathetic, and this is not the kind of behavior you want to raise your children with, right? So you could completely block out the sunlight. It's within your rights because it's your property, and you could pretty much do whatever you want in your property besides start a fire that's going to spread, right? I hate to mention it now with what we just went through in Laguna Niguel. But we all understand, it goes without saying. So my question is, how would Torah law handle this? What would the Torah law say about this? We're going to have the answer soon. Huh?
Can't build a fence.
John is absolutely right. The Torah would say you're absolutely not allowed to do it. Wait a second, it's my own property. You're not allowed to do that. Do what is righteous and just in the eyes of Hashem.
Now you're infringing upon this other person's life, not livelihood necessarily, but living, his ability to live a productive
Right.
life.
In the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Sodom that was destroyed, is synonymous with cruelty.
Right.
Why were they cruel? Because they thought only of themselves. And not only that, they made sure that nothing of their wealth, was a very fertile land, was given to outsiders. The reason in this example, the Torah would say absolutely not, is very simple. You're hurting another human being.
Exactly.
Yes, you're doing it on your own property, but you're hurting another human being in the process. If it was a situation where the other person wasn't being hurt, knock yourself out. But you're hurting another person. You're destroying their life. You're harassing them for all intents and purposes. But as Americans, we know that, yes, it would be within your rights to do here. You know, of course, there are laws of how high you could build and walls, but if it's within the limits, it's within your rights. I think your picture is colored, and mine is not. Okay, I'm going to complain to them. But you see what's happening here. All right, Sandy, thank you very much. Mike will go to Flory, so you don't have to go too far. Well, let's do case study B, and these case studies really gives us the picture of the whole class.
Rachel maintains a large and beautiful flower bed in her yard, but one day her neighbor Joe built a high wooden fence between their properties that cast shade over the garden, causing the flowers to die. When Rachel asked Joe why his fence needed to be so high, she was told that it was necessary to protect his birds from cats entering the property. Rachel offered to replace the wooden fence with a glass screen at her personal expense in order to allow her flowers to receive sunlight without exposing Joe's birds to danger, but Joe refused to allow Rachel to replace the fence without offering any reason.
Okay, so again, should Joe be legally required to allow Rachel to replace his wooden fence with a glass screen? This is a more difficult question.
Yes.
Okay, so according to the law, no, right? You're not going to tell me what to do in my property. According to Torah law.
There we go.
It should be,
He
he should be able to do it according to Torah law.
Why?
Why? Because he's depriving the other person of their rights.
You say he should be allowed to?
He shouldn't.
He shouldn't be. So Rachel should not be allowed to replace the wooden fence with a glass one. That's what you're saying.
No, he shouldn't be able to have the high fence that he has.
Right, the question was,
allow Rachel to put in the glass.
okay,
That's what.
right.
Well, it gets more complicated. So if she puts a glass fence up on her property, does she now have the right to tear down his wooden fence?
Right. This is an extraordinary thing about this case. And this is, you may agree with it, but let it sink in first before we say, well. If I, as a neighbor, if I'm doing something to hurt my neighbor by blocking the sunlight okay? If I'm able to find a solution to the problem that's going to allow the sunlight to come in, the Torah says my neighbor has to allow me to rectify it, to correct it, and if he refuses, then I could do whatever I want. Why? He tells me he has a problem with my wall. I understand. I need the sunlight. My flowers are going to die. Wait a second, I have a solution. I need a wall because of the animals, to keep the animals out. I'm going to make it see-through. I'm going to make it glass. You get your sun. No, I don't want it. Why? I just don't want it. Doesn't work that way. In Torah, it doesn't work that way because I found a solution to the problem. And I found the solution to the problem means that you're not being hurt anymore. And because you're not being hurt anymore, and I need that wall to be there, my neighbor has to agree to it. Now, what's if I come in and I'm starting to make changes, but it does hurt my neighbor? If it even inconveniences them, all bets are off. That's different. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a situation where nothing changes. There's no harm to my neighbor. The objective is being met in terms of keeping the animals out. And the sun is allowed in because I used my seichel, my Yiddish cup, and I created a glass barrier. You cannot stop me from doing it. I'm going to come into your property, the Herst. I'm going to do it for you. No expense. And I'm going to make sure it's clean when I'm done. That's a little stretch, isn't it? Why are you allowed to do this? Because do what is righteous in the eyes of Hashem. You had a problem, I fixed your problem. Now what's your problem?
The problem is privacy. I claim that it now is an infringement on their privacy, so tear the glass down and put up something that's private, right?
Right, but that wasn't the problem.
That wasn't the problem.
The problem was...
Keep the animals out in because I want some privacy.
But he didn't.
Right, but the problem with the barrier was that the neighbor, let's say on this side, needed the sunlight for his flowers,
Flowers or plants.
right?
Yeah.
So he says, take down your wall. So this guy says, you know what? I'm going to find a solution to solve my problem and your problem. No animals coming through and sunlight coming through. No, I don't want it. The Torah would say you have to do it.
What if the neighbor had, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Go ahead.
What if the neighbor had said privacy as well? What?
Yeah, but, okay. Oh, here we have a lawyer. There you go.
Another wrinkle here.
By the way, I feel like I'm back at yeshiva right here. If you want to know how it was studying Talmud, so Sandy brings up a good point. What if she said, I need sunlight and I need privacy? That's different.
It's not going to give you privacy.
Hold on, that's different. I would say that's different according to that logic. But that's not what they say. But here's my question to you, Sandy. Here's my question to you. What if initially the objection was only, I need sunlight, and then they weren't happy, this neighbor wasn't happy, that according to the Torah law, I'm allowed to change it to glass. And he goes, actually, I also want privacy, as an afterthought.
I think
That's the question.
There's more than one problem here, in that either the two parties, or however many there are, agree that we need to find a solution. But in this case, he offered a solution, and if it was turned down at that point, it seems like some people want to live with a problem. They don't really want to solve it.
And if one person likes living with problems, and by the way, I could tell you there are people who choose to be angry.
Sure.
I know this firsthand, many times over. And wait a second. When there are people, if there's somebody, by the way, you identify it and you deal with problems a lot differently. And I'm a rabbi of a congregation. But I just want to say, it's a very good point. If one of the parties wants to live with a problem, it's not my problem. That's not the neighbor's problem, it's their problem. And therefore, they lose their right to decide what the barrier should be, because you're only trying to perpetuate the problem. So what's the point here? The point is we need to keep the animals out. That's for one neighbor. We need the sunlight to enter for another neighbor. A perfect solution is a glass thing. There is no way that that glass barrier is not going up according to Jewish law. That's how it is. Because the Torah says you have to do what's just. And the only thing you brought up was that you want your flowers to have sunlight. There's your sunlight, finished. I asked the question, because I'm a yeshiva bacher, what's if it's an afterthought, right? I don't like the, but you know what? If they say, like, I like privacy too, it's very legitimate. We all like privacy.
There's still a solution to that, potentially. If it's not one of those people that thrives on conflict and, anger and all of that, he could say, well, I'll help you plant the flowers that need sunlight on the other side.
Yeah.
There's always a way.
Jews are starting to move furniture around.
I'm going to offer you a factual situation that involves secular law and get your reaction to it.
Okay.
So at our home, one of our two neighbors on our right side has this real need to plant as many trees as he possibly can. And
Right on the fence.
right on the fence. It jeopardizes a solid wall we have, both of us have, that could be impaired. And more than that, he has planted about 70 trees from one end of the property to the other. It has created a virtual wall. He and I are going to have a conversation shortly. And the problem is that it blocks a great deal of light coming onto our property, and many of the plants that we have planted over the years before he ever arrived there, we've been there for 40 years, are
dying.
suffering.
Yeah.
What he doesn't know, and this is the factual part for you to react to, or anyone else in here, is that there is case law as opposed to statutory law that's going to surprise my neighbor. And what it says is, if you have planted a number of trees together and they exceed the height of 10 feet, which these are at least 25 feet now.
It's like the cedar trees from Lebanon, it sounds like.
Yeah, and he actually has a couple of those as well.
Sure.
And he doesn't know about this law. He's about to find out.
Yeah.
So there is case law again, and I think everyone here understands what case law means.
Yeah.
And that solves the problem for me.
Yeah. Well, best of luck. And you are not only, you're right according to Torah law. That's what concerns, that's what matters to me, because he's hurting you and he's hurting the things in your property, and that's what the Torah cares about.
Is your neighbor Jewish?
No, I can't quote Talmud to him,
Is
no.
your neighbor Jewish?
And
No.
another issue would be the water usage.
Or in the
Yeah,
roots.
but that's not.
I have that too.
How about the roots?
And on
The
top
roots
of
are coming down.
So, okay, order in the court. Order in the court.
Makes a mess.
Tell me, I could hear it.
Gershon?
He has the same issue.
So going back to the case study B,
Yeah.
it sounds like what I hear is Jewish law says that a solution that benefits two people is mandatory over a solution that benefits only one.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But it's a great novel idea. It's a great chiddush. Why? Because I'm allowed to do it for you in your property. That's the novel idea. I'm not, you understand? Because I'm finding a solution. That's what it means to live and do the righteous thing that is righteous in the eyes of Hashem. Now, case study C is very, 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 relevant to today's day and age, Michael moved into a new home. Before setting up his own Wi-Fi connection, he realizes, hey, wait a second. My neighbor has a perfect Wi-Fi. It's a strong connection. Am I allowed to do it or not? So I'm going to just say it right out. We're not going to guess. According to the Torah law, if it, and it's, you could agree or disagree, if it doesn't hurt my neighbor at all, and I'm able to benefit from him, it's called zen nehene. This one receives benefit. V'zel lo chaser, and this one loses nothing, and I underline nothing. According to the Torah, you're allowed to do it. However, we know often this is not the case. Too many parties on a Wi-Fi connection could slow it down. And there could be other issues. I know in my own home over COVID, when all the kids were home, and they were climbing the walls, and I got 6 of them, and they all have 16 devices, it was impossible to get a signal. I had to literally ask my daughters, could you shut your phone off for a second? I got to send out an email to the community about Shabbos. You know? So I saw firsthand.
Yes.
Huh?
That's the thing.
It network if you wanted.
That is correct. That's another very good point. If you don't want to be mooched off,
Inviting moochers.
exactly, you can with a password, which you should do anyway.
Exactly.
Which you should do anyway. And Aaron, I was going to do it for my children. You know.
Yeah. When I look at my phone and say if I have connection, and I see that in my neighborhood there are 6 or 7 others, but they all have the lock on them.
Yeah, exactly.
They should.
Exactly.
Because I have a lock on mine.
Right. So to lighten things up, Lori, this teenager shows up at a funeral of a very prominent gentleman in the community. Everybody's very sad. He passed away way too young. And the teenager is getting restless. And he goes over to the funeral manager. He says, please tell me, what is the Wi-Fi connection? And he looks at him, he says, respect the dead. He says, is that all in lowercase? Miss Shane. Okay, let's now go to the 4th and final case study. And these are great because it dissects and gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here. I'm going to ask our wonderful photographer, videographer, to read case study D, page 12.
Sarah's next-door neighbor, David, left on a lengthy vacation. It is difficult to find parking on their street, and David's driveway, situated smack in between their 2 homes, is now empty. Sarah wishes to park her car there while her neighbor is away. Should Sarah be allowed to park her car in David's vacant driveway without his advance permission?
No.
Okay, so according to the law of the land, of course not. According to Torah law? Yes. Anybody say no?
It's the same.
Okay, let's say he's driving a Chabad car that deposits oil wherever it parks.
Yeah.
Yeah? Or no? No. See?
Now it's harming the neighbor's property.
It doesn't harm.
Right. So see, it's funny because I have a friend. His name is David, and he became Shomer Shabbat, and I had a lot to do with it. And he sells cars for a living. It's actually in Beach Boulevard of cars. And when he started keeping Shabbat, he says it's a funny thing. Business is not going down. He says Saturday is it's the busiest day, even more than Sunday. And then there was these 3-day holidays. He's like, Rabbi, does Torah believe in making a living? It's like, you're killing me, Larry. And then, but he tells me miraculously that business is not suffering. But then he found out that his competitor next door, this is his old location, got the idea that every Saturday he's gone, and he would check the Jewish calendar, and he would park and showcase all his cars on his lot. That's different because he has repeat customers. And he actually told me the repeat customers said, you're not there on Saturday? And these are customers he knows for years. I was there and you weren't there, but he still got the sale. And he told me they respected him because he was keeping his tradition, knowing that it doesn't look very good for his customers, but he owed it to Hashem first, right? But in that case, it's different. How about no leaking car, you're not in town, if you're not being harmed, but you see there's a difference here. The difference between finding out about it after the fact. But let's say I know about it before. I know about your intentions of parking your car. Do I have a right, according to the Torah, to say no? Even though I'm not there, no. So we're going to learn about this.
But Rabbi,
There is an exception.
as a matter of fact, I have a neighbor who went to France who's leaving her car, and I have a very wide parking area. But the reality is, without asking the neighbor, how do you know that she's not having painters coming or her sister-in-law coming, and they need the space? You
Okay.
just park there.
All right, so because...
So you should ask.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
You should ask, and you're going to cause problems. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead just to address this. In the Torah, even though we said that if nobody loses, I'm allowed to do it, how about I decide to park in your house, squatters, right? Empty apartment, New York, we grew up with this, you know. You're not renting it out, it's empty, I'm not causing any harm, I'm not using your electricity, can I do it or not? The answer is, listen to this, I have the right, according to the Torah law, even though I'm not losing anything, nothing, to say no, if I find out beforehand, because there is a certain loss. Could anybody tell me what the loss is? There's no utilities, I don't leave any foul odor. What is the loss?
Property value. If you wanted to go sell it, and somebody's been camping out there,
Okay, let's say,
get a cleaning crew.
okay, so let's say that doesn't exist. Let's say there's no problems there.
Peace of mind.
According to Jewish law, if my rights as a homeowner are being restricted to the point where I cannot tell you to leave my property, that is considered, according to our sages, as a loss to me. You see this? As a loss to me. Which is very interesting because there isn't actually a monetary loss. But there's a loss, it's considered a loss, because psychologically, what do you mean I'm not allowed to tell you to leave my property? Get off my property. And it's really the same thing that David is saying. In other words, but how do we translate what I just said about squatters to parking the car? Before I answer that, if I found out that you were living in my house, can I give you a bill for what you've done? No. Why? Because you didn't lose anything. Beforehand, according to the Torah law, of course, this doesn't apply to American law. Beforehand, I could say, please, I would appreciate it if you don't go into my house, but you're not losing anything. I like controlling my property, thank you very much. But after the fact, I cannot give you a bill. Why? Because I lost nothing. Now, if I lost, and I could prove it, of course, but you can't give a bill to somebody who didn't take anything from you. And again, because of the same idea, the Torah law is here to shape a society, to do what is righteous, and if nobody's losing and somebody else is gaining, so be it. But beforehand, I could tell you, please don't go into my property. It is a loss where I cannot control what comes in and out of my property. I don't want you to be there. So that's that. With the vehicle, it's a little bit different than the home. And there's a debate. It's debatable. Could you compare parking your vehicle in somebody's garage or somebody's driveway as the kind of infringing as a home if I clearly said I don't want you in my driveway or not? Okay, but let's say beforehand I'm allowed to tell you, please don't do it because I need to control my property. And that's a loss, considered a loss if I'm not able to control my property. Let's take a look at page 12, figure 1.1. Just a few of examples, right and good commandments. But you hear how he says it, right and good. You'll never see here this in our society, let's call it a civil society, that you have to do what is right and good. No, what is, we use the word right differently. What is within the rights, which is very different than right. Mm-hmm. Do not stand by when someone's life is at risk. If I, God forbid, so you see somebody drowning, and I'm in a position of saving the person, according to American law, do I need to save the person?
No.
No. According to the Torah law, if I'm in a position to save somebody's life, am I obligated to save the person's life? Absolutely yes.
Make every effort to do so.
You know, we should be proud to be the people of the book, because doesn't that sound better? I'm not talking about running into the ocean, shark infested, whatever, where I'm endangering my own life, where I'm not obligated. By the way, there was a story of the Lubavitcher Rebbe as a young child, where he was walking on the banks of the Dnepropetrovsk at the time, Katyslav. Today it's called Dnieper. It changed in 2016. I didn't know until recently. And he saw somebody drowning. And he jumped in and he saved the person's life. Most people wouldn't do that because I could be swept in, you know. But if there's absolutely no problem, or there's an animal, a small animal attacking a child, like a coyote, and I have a stick in my hand, like easily, I better save the person. If I don't, I've violated Torah law. You see this? Mm-hmm. So if you tell me, what about if it's a tiger? We're not talking about a tiger, right? Next, pick up any lost object. We talked about this before. You encounter and return it to its owner. Provide roadside assistance.
Interesting, that's in Exodus. I didn't realize they had cars in Exodus.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. You hear what Aaron said?
No.
It says provide roadside assistance, and it's quoted from Exodus. They had vehicles then?
They had chariots.
Cars.
The answer is roadside assistance for the chariots or whatever they had. That chariots way back in biblical times.
The horse, the donkey.
They had wagons.
Oh, the last one. Don't spread gossip. Could you be arrested for gossiping in America? No, unless you slander.
Unless you slander, yeah.
Slander. But gossip, you're allowed to gossip away. In Torah, it's a nasty sin. It's not just a sin, it's one of the worst sins. It destroys families, it destroys communities. And now you know how terrible it is because of how much people are tempted by it. Juicy piece of gossip. It's a horrible sin. And you violated big time. You're in big trouble with the big boss if we gossip. And gossip doesn't mean making up false rumors, which is bad enough. It's even worse if it's true, in a sense, because it's true. If it's not true, it's nasty, but you find out the truth, that the guy was full of it. Here, I'm speaking something negative about somebody else. Be very, very, very careful. I said this many times in my home, and this you could keep on the camera. You don't talk about people. Not by a Shabbos table and not any other time. Because we don't talk about people. If you want to say something nice about somebody, okay. So we're talking about a different world here. A completely different world. And it's good we set down the foundation before because all of it falls into place. Now let's see on page 6, page 13, text 5, the spirit of the law from Maimonides, the great Spanish physician, philosopher. Linda, would you like to read for us?
Our sages expounded on this verse and explained that it instructs us to go beyond the letter of the law. In other words, the Torah first exhorts us to observe all of God's commandments, and it now instructs us to be careful to do that which is right and good, even when not explicitly commanded to do so, because God cherishes good and proper conduct. This instruction is very important because it would be impossible for the Torah to exhaustively address all our conduct with our friends and neighbors, all our business affairs, and the welfare of society and the world. Instead, after offering multiple specific commandments, such as you shall not go about as a gossip monger, do not take revenge or bear a grudge, do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood, do not curse even a deaf person, and stand in the presence of the aged, the Torah then concludes with a generalized command to do that which is right and good, meaning to go beyond the letter of the law.
This is very interesting because if you want to know how to conduct yourself, there should be laws for everything. It's impossible. When you're talking about being righteous, doing what is right, when you're talking about creating a society that's compassionate, it's impossible for the Torah to possibly list every single last example. And therefore, it gives us basic rules, and then it says you got to leave it up to your imagination to do what is right, as long as there's no loss to you. As long as there's no loss to you. So we have the guidelines, and that's why in the verse it gives that generalization. Okay. We're going to go a little bit quicker because this class is supposed to be an hour and a half. I know we started a little bit late, and I don't want to go, I know it's late. Let's talk about Sodom, as we mentioned before. A person is compelled by law not to act in a manner characteristic of the inhabitants of Sodom. What is the character of Sodom? The people of the ancient city of Sodom were notorious for their wickedness. Their conduct was so bad that Hashem had to destroy them. But what exactly is the characteristic of Sodom? And this is a fascinating answer, taken from Pirkei Avot, the chapters of our fathers, known as Ethics of Our Fathers, which we study now during the Shabbat, the summer months. Page 16, it says, one who insists what is mine, and what is yours. What kind of character he has? It's an average character, according to one opinion. However, there's another opinion. And it says, the other opinion maintains that such an attitude is characteristic of the wicked people of Sodom. My goodness. What is mine, what is yours. Isn't that the fact? So the first opinion says that that's an intermediary. The other opinion says, no, that's Sodom, wicked. Wicked to say what is mine, what is yours. How could we understand this? Let's see what the holy and great Meiri tells us on page 16. I believe it's 7b. Lori?
Both statements in the Mishnah are valid because the second view, which classifies such conduct as wicked, refers to those who refuse to permit others to benefit from them, even when they will incur no personal or monetary expense as a result. Such conduct is characteristics of the inhabitants of Sodom. By contrast, the first view in the Mishnah, which classifies such conduct as average, refers to those who refuse to allow others to benefit from them when doing so would come at a personal or monetary expense. Individuals who adopt this approach cannot be compared to the inhabitants of Sodom because they seek simply to avoid incurring losses through the actions of others, just as they would not inflict a loss upon their fellow. This indeed reflects the average character.
So if I refuse to do you a favor with no personal loss, and that's why I'm saying what is mine, what is yours, leave me alone, but I want to use something, let's say the Wi-Fi, with no personal loss, give me a password, I have to do something quickly, it's a midas of Sodom, it's the characteristics of Sodom and Gomorrah that was destroyed. That's how far Torah law takes it. It doesn't seem right to us Americans because it's so contrary to the law of the land. But this is the godly law, and you see why it's godly. Because it's teaching us to be menschlich, compassionate, of a generous spirit. What are you of us out there, as the other saying goes? Why does it bother you? You're not losing anything. If it slows down my speed, my internet's fine. You know it's not hurting you. Why are you saying no? And therefore, ha'omer shali shali v'shalach shalach. Person who says what is mine, and what is yours, and we're talking about, as Lori read just now, where there's no personal loss for me whatsoever, and there's no inconvenience, Sodom, and Gomorrah, because that's the characteristic that they had. It bothered them when somebody benefited from them, even when there was no loss to them. However, the first opinion was, what is mine, is yours. I do incur a certain loss by giving it to you. We're not going to go as far as saying that's Sodom. That's wickedness because I'm incurring a loss. We can't judge you. You want to live beyond the letter of the law? That's wonderful. It's pious. That's trust. That's praiseworthy, and so forth. Now, let's go straight to Maimonides. Went from Nachmanides to Maimonides, text 8, page 18. Where are we holding? John, would you like to read?
Set in the lower portion
of his house, and his neighbor desires to erect a building that would block them. The neighbor proposes to solve the problem by installing new windows in the upper portion of the homeowner's wall. If this arrangement won't cause the homeowner any difficulty at all and would not require him to leave his home during the construction, he cannot prevent the new neighbor from performing this construction. The homeowner is compelled by law to allow the neighbor to close the windows on the bottom part of his wall and create new windows higher up. This is because it would be Sodom-like conduct for the homeowner to refuse this accommodation. The principle applies to every situation in which one individual will benefit while his fellow will not lose anything as a result. In all such cases, the relevant party is compelled by law to cooperate.
So it's very similar, or pretty much the same, as the example at the beginning of the class. What Maimonides of this law teaches us is if the neighbor offers a solution that would come at no expense to the homeowner, he is compelled to allow him to do it for him. Move the window up, sunlight comes in, end of story, like the case we had before.
With the wall.
The wall. Replace the wall with a see-through wall so that the sun could come in. I'm doing the work. You have nothing to worry about. What's if he says, you're inconveniencing me? I have a sick mother at home. The deal's off because there's a loss. There's inconvenience. And we're not going to do that. We're talking about zero loss. Zero loss. That's the attribute of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? Question for discussion. How might Jewish law adjudicate case study A and B? So in case study B, just to refresh your memory, we really did this, but I'm going to do this very briefly. Rachel wished to replace Joe's wooden fence with a glass screen. We already discussed this. And the answer is you're allowed to do that. You tell this to anybody living in any country around the world, they'll think you're insane. What kind of people are this? And the answer is it's not man-made law, it's God-made law. And God needs human beings to conduct a certain way, conduct themselves a certain way, to create not just a civil society, but a society that's compassionate, wholesome, a society of people that care for each other. Could you imagine just following the letter of the law of the land and no more? There would be no charity. You're not obligated to pay your taxes, but you're not, and you get a tax write-off. Well, you know that in Chabad, right? But you're not obligated to give charity. Imagine a world with no charity. First of all, we wouldn't exist. We just signed on a $5.1 million building, right? How do you think that happened? Because the rabbi's father has a PhD, Papa hat Geld? I don't think so. Papa hat dough, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's case B. Secular law deals with these cases completely differently, and even it could be that, and I've read about situations where there's spite laws, where that example that we gave, even though I'm building it in my property, but if I'm completely closing off sunlight or air, or like what you're going through, there were states that enacted spite laws, right? But nevertheless, Torah law goes much further than that. You do anything to hurt somebody else, even in your own property, just to spite, the Torah would say, no way. Absolutely not allowed to do this because you're harming somebody and you're doing for spite. Not only are you not losing anything, you're trying to hurt the other person. We even obligate you to do something for somebody else where you're not losing and the person is gaining. Here you want to hurt the person just for the sake of hurting somebody when you're not losing anything. For sure you're not allowed to do that. Okay? Now let's come back, and with this, we're winding down a little bit. Let's see text 9, because we alluded to it before. What's if I want to move into your house, you're out of town, there's no renters, there's no damage. David mentioned about property value going down. If that's the case, forget about it. There's damage, right?
Oh, yes.
So let's have Anna and the corner there. Text 9 on page 20. Read for us.
One lives in his fellow yard without the latter's knowledge. Does he have to pay him rent or not? The question is in regard to a yard that is not on the market for rent, but the squatter is a person who usually rents. What is the law? Can the squatter say to the owner, "What loss have I caused you?" Or perhaps the owner can insist, "Look, you have benefited from my property instead of paying rent elsewhere." This is a case in which one individual benefits while the other does not lose anything. The Talmud concludes, Rabbah the son of Rav Huna stated, "My father ruled in the name of Rav that the squatter does not have to pay rent."
After the fact. However, and I'm going quickly because we did this already. What about before the fact? And we'll give it to Lorraine. Text 10. Right to refuse, a different story.
We only compel the property owner not to conduct himself like the inhabitants of Sodom regarding the past. The squatter, who resided on his property without paying rent, is not compelled to pay him rent for the past. At the same time, it is clear that the property owner has the right to protest the squatter's presence and need not permit the squatter to remain on his property.
Okay. And we said before that if there's no loss to somebody else, then you have to allow the person to do this. So why am I not obligated to allow the person to stay on my property when I clearly do not want it to be on my property? So we explained, because as a homeowner, if my lack of control of what could happen or not happen in my property is considered loss. That's what we said. Okay? You just read number 10, correct?
Correct.
And this is, and I kind of gave the introduction, so it's familiar to you. Compromising control. Aaron, on text 11.
In my opinion, the reason Tosafot rules that the property owner cannot be actively compelled to allow a squatter on his property is because compulsion in such an instance would be forcible negation of the property owner's control over his own property. Most people would object to this. The failure of an individual to consent to something that most people would object to cannot be considered Sodom-like conduct. However, the squatter's presence on the property without the owner's knowledge doesn't negate the owner's control of the property, because the owner retains the right to evict the squatter at any time.
Okay, so the other case that we had about the Wi-Fi, we already went through it, but you have to make sure and determine there's absolutely no loss. Obviously, if the homeowner person who has the Wi-Fi wants to allow you, you're encouraged to behave in that manner, even with a loss, because it's not really a loss, you know. But what's if the person is out of town? Are you allowed to use the Wi-Fi without his knowledge, according to the Torah Law? Yes. Why? Because there's no loss to him. And like Aaron said before, let him put a password on it. Mm-hmm. Maybe the fact that he doesn't have that password required, he is kind of indicating that he doesn't care that you use it.
It's open season.
It's open season, exactly. In case study 3, it's clear that you could park your car without the person's knowledge. However, I would argue, if I know about it beforehand and I say, please don't do that, I probably, according to Torah law, could force the person to move his car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you park in somebody's driveway without their permission, okay? A branch from the tree falls and cracks your windshield. You go and sue the property owner. You should trim your trees.
Yeah.
So there's an exposure there.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to respond with the last thing that we're going to read, and you'll you know, obviously the Torah would say the only difficulty with what you just did is you started off with a Torah concept law, and we concluded with a question that has to do with the land, the law of the land. We have to be consistent. The Torah in your case would say, no, you can't sue. Come on. Do what is righteous in the eyes of Hashem. The guy allowed you to park your car in your driveway. What do you, like I said before, it's Meshuggah and cup.
But Rabbi, if somebody loans, it's in the Torah, I believe.
That what?
That if somebody asks you to take care of their animal, and you put it in your house, and something happens to it, you're responsible for it.
It depends what kind of shomer, what kind of guardian. There's 4 different kinds. A shomer chinam, a she'ena sachar, a seicha, and a shayel. I'll tell you very briefly, and this is what we study in yeshiva. Shomer chinam is a guardian who does it for free. For him, the laws are very lenient because I'm doing it as a favor. A shomer sachar is the guardian who charges for his service. A little bit more strict. A socher is a renter. I'm benefiting, but I'm paying for the benefit, and I have to also guard it while I'm renting the car, while I'm renting whatever it may be. The socher, the renter, and the one who guards for pay have very similar laws. They're similar. The person who's out of luck, the borrower. Because kol hana'a shalo. This is bringing me back, by the way. Kol hana'a shalo, all the benefit is his. He's not paying to use it. He wants to use it. You're doing him a favor. He better guard that thing very, very well. The only time he's not obligated to pay is if it's a complete onus, complete accident. Right? Okay. Now, this is fascinating, and we're going to conclude with this. Recommended conduct. This is taking it to a step further. Recommended reading, right? Recommended conduct. While Jewish law will not compel an individual to suffer a loss in order to allow benefit to a second party, it does expect a person to behave beyond the letter of law. What's the problem? Do something even if you have a little loss. So it's going to kill you. Depends. So let's see this fascinating read from Baba Metzia and the Talmud. Text 12, we'll have Albert.
Rabbah Bar Hanan's barrel of wine was negligently broken by the porters he hired to transport it. Rabbah seized the porters' cloaks as payments for the damage. The porters complained to Rav, who instructed Rabbah, "Give them back their cloaks." Rabbah asked, "Is that the law?" Rav replied, "Yes, as stated in the verse, in order that you follow the path of the good people." Proverbs 2:20. Rabbah returned the porters to their cloaks. The porters complained further to Rav, "We are poor and we have labored all day. Now we are hungry and have nothing to eat." Rav told Rabbah, "Pay them their wages." Rabbah answered, "Is that the law?" Rav responded, "Yes, as stated in the verse, and observe the ways of the righteous." Proverbs 2:20.
Could you imagine this? I hire a shlemazel to do a job for me. This shlemazel, right, living up to his full shlemazelic expectations, he breaks this, right? And he says the law is that I have to give, and I take something back. I say, I just incurred a great loss. No, give him back the cloaks. In fact, pay him for his services. You can't even use it. You can't even use the word services. What do you mean? I regret the day I met you.
That's a double service.
So he says that's the law. How could he say yes? Is that the law? The answer is no, it's not the law. Why did he say yes? And the answer is because he was talking to somebody that for his level, that is the law. Because it's recommended conduct. Now, I just want to end with this because it's a profound thought. It's recommended conduct, and it's for his level, he should be expected to behave that way, but why does he use the word law? It's not law. Even according to Torah, it's not law. The guy broke my vessel, he broke my thing, and now I have to pay him nach. Why does he use the word law, even though it's not law? So he said because his student was on that level, that for his level, it's befitting for him to behave beyond the letter of the law. And the answer why it's called law, even though it's not law, is because of the general premise of what Torah law is trying to achieve. And that is what? To create a society in which people are not just not infringing on somebody else's property rights and rights in general, but behaves compassionately. And if this great rabbi would not behave in beyond the letter of the law, what kind of example will he be giving to his students? They would violate the Torah's objective in what Hashem needed out of the Torah law. That's why it's called law. And that's why he answered yes. So it's a complicated idea, and it's very different than what we have come accustomed to in our, like say, great society. It is a great society, but it's not, the laws were not written by Hashem, it's man-made. As great as our founding fathers were, they weren't God. They didn't, walk on water. Even if they did walk on water, they weren't God. And because he was expected to behave, even though he encountered a shlemazel that ruined his day, he has to pay them because they have nothing to eat. Do what is right. Do what is right. Maybe next week I'll tell the story of LaGuardia that I've shared many times. In this way, the objective of Torah law to mold a society rather than just making sure that the rights of all of the citizens of this particular society are being upheld, do what is right. And in this case, the person is starving. He spent the whole day trying to do his best. He has 2 left feet, and he has hands like the rabbi. So he can't build. He can't screw in something straight. So you're going to fault him? You called Naphtali, SOS, bail me out. You're going to fault him? He put in an honest day's work. Feed him. Zayam mensch. Am I violating a law if I don't do? No. Is it the law? The teacher said, for you it's the law. Because that's what Hashem is trying to accomplish with Torah law. Isn't this beautiful? To be a Jew and to follow the way the Torah tells us to behave, it's a completely different person. Now you know why Jews, for the most part, are so respected. Now you know why Gershon, the country that you and Naphtali served in the IDF, is so revered and is held to a standard that even America is not held to. The answer is because of this. Consciously or not, the world expects the Jews to behave on an elevated level. And if you look at the conflict in the Middle East, where one side behaves the way they do, and the other side behaves the way they do, and the world expects each side to behave the way, it's something to be proud of. It's something to be proud of. Next time you feel like your jaws are tightening and you're getting angry because of how the media portrays us, you have a right to be angry, but calm down and say, you know what? I'm proud that I'm part of these people, that the world expects us to behave on such a elevated moral level, and I'm going to try to behave this way too. And before you bomb a hospital from which things are being launched on civilians, we let them know in advance that this is what's happening, this is what's coming. This is that's not only a civil society, this is a godly society. Israel's a godly society that follows godly rules, because according to the rules of war, it's meshuggah. They don't have to do what they're doing. No law would say you have to do that. So they do it not only because they're going to be condemned in the UN, in the House of Darkness, or all over the place. They do it because it's a Jewish society. And Jewish society behaves in a godly way. That's a godly way. The way Israel conducts themselves in a godly way. Do they make mistakes? I'm sure they do. Are they always right? No. They're human beings. But they're prosecuted when they make mistakes by Israeli courts. So this is not politics. This is to try to give you a Torah perspective on how Jews ought to behave in an elevated manner. And for that we should be proud. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Next week, same time, same channel.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shikawach.